If you can't tell already by the theme, this video is going to be for all the vampire goths out there. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite goth music that revolves around vampires. We'll start off with Bela Lugosi's Dead by Bauhaus. Obviously this one had to be mentioned. It's one of my favorites, and like I said in an earlier video, it's also the song that got me into goth music. If you aren't familiar with who Bela Lugosi is, he is a Hungarian actor who portrayed Dracula in the 1931 Universal Monsters Dracula. It also happens to be one of my favorite movies of all time. Next up, we've got Selofan's Vitrioli. It features the song Billy Was a Vampire. It's definitely a fan favorite from this band. But I'd say this whole album is packed full of songs that have a vampire vibe to them. This one is 45 Graves, Sleep in Safety. I think the obvious pick for most people on this album if they're thinking about vampires would be the song Riboflavin, and it's amazing. You gotta love that one, it's a classic. But I think a lot more people should talk about Procession. It's one of my absolute favorite songs by this band in general, and it's obviously a vampire song if you look at the lyrics. Really, this whole album has great vampire vibes, especially like kind of more punk vampire along the lines of Lost Boys is kind of how I think of it. This is Antagonism by Bleib Modern. This is an album I got really obsessed with for a long time. It's definitely got more like doom and gloom kind of vibes to it. Grey Dawn is the opening track, and it kind of starts off like you're about to be killed by the sun. If you listen to this album, I would listen to it all the way through in the order that the tracks are listed. It's so good, it's an experience to listen to. Now this one's a compilation instead of a specific band or album, but I'd highly recommend it. It's a goth vampire compilation made in the 90s. This is volume 2. I haven't found volume 1 yet, but it's really good. It's got a lot of really iconic ones on it, and it's got great album art. Here's a look at the track listing. Now the band Inkubus Sukkubus, really you could pick up any album by them and it's probably going to be pretty heavily vampire themed, but these are two of my favorite albums by them. Vampire Erotica is one of their more classic albums. It came out in '97. My favorite songs on it are probably going to be the title track Vampire Erotica and Heart of Lilith. There's also a really good cover of Paint It Black on here. Vampire Queen is a little bit newer by them. It came out in 2018, but it's again one of my favorite ones by them. My two favorite songs on this one are going to be Vampire Queen and Let the Night Last Forever. This is Shadow in the Dark by NNHMN. It's a lot more dark wave if that's your flavor. I think they have a lot more than just this album that would fit the vampire vibe, but this is the one that I picked out. It's my favorite by them. My two favorite tracks on here are going to be Shadow in the Dark and Vampire. This is one that I've been listening to a lot lately. It's become one of my very favorites. It's a 90s band. They're called Paralyzed Age. Pretty much everything that they write is also vampire themed, which is great. Empire the Vampire is kind of their greatest hits album, so it's kind of a good one to get. It's also one of their more accessible albums if you want to buy a physical copy. Some of my favorites on here are going to be Bloodsucker, Patricia in Pain, Nocturne, and Morella's Sleep. This is the 90s goth band, Two Witches. If you like a more traditional flavor of goth, this is going to be one you probably like. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to come by physical copies of their albums. This is a compilation. It's called Wenches, Witches, and Vampires. For a band called Two Witches, it's kind of funny because most of their songs are about vampires rather than witches. But my two favorite songs by them are going to be Vampire Empire and Cat's Eyes. This is the album Angel Dust by the band Blutengel. They're a German industrial band. Again, most of their songs are vampire themed, but this album especially is a really good one, I think, to start with. It's got Vampire Romance, Part 1 and 2 on it, and those are some really big ones. This is the album Rise by Nosferatu. I think it's probably their most popular album. If you can't already tell by their name, they're also, again, another very vampire-heavy band. And if you're into more traditional goth rock, this is again another great album for you. It's got probably what I would say is their most popular song on it too, which is Vampire's Cry, and it's popular for a reason. It's very good. Also, fun fact, this band also toured in a hearse for a short time. Bloodletting is a southern goth rock album by the band Concrete Blonde. It's an absolute masterpiece. If I had to pick my favorite songs on here, it would probably be Bloodletting, The Beast, and Darkening of the Light. I just absolutely love the album artwork on here. I don't think that there's a skippable song on the album, and I also have it on cassette. The Hunger by Vampyrean just recently came out. It's the solo project of Vlad, previously of Nosferatu. It's absolutely full of a lot of great songs that I think can become classics. At the moment, some of my favorites on here are In Vain, Watch Me Bleed, and Crimson Dreams. This is A Time for Roses by Blood Bells. They're another newer band. I really hope they come out with more stuff soon because they're so good. I would say some of the more vampy songs on this album would be Veins and Red, but you should definitely check them out. Now this one's a French band and I'm not confident that I can pronounce it right, but I believe it's Theater of the Vampires in English, and I'm guessing they got that name from Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. I don't talk about gothic metal very much. It's generally a genre I'm not very into, despite being a huge fan of goth and metal. But I would say that this one is an exception. The whole album is really fun, super high energy, and it's got vampire vibes throughout the whole thing. My favorite song on here is track 3. Again, I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I'll butcher it, but I think that it might even be the most popular song by this band. This is the Kentucky Vampires. They're a really fun kind of death rock post-punk band. I'd recommend checking out more than this album because, again, all of their other albums are pretty vampire themed and really, really good. But some of my favorite songs on this album are going to be Bitten and The Spider and the Fly. Those are at least all the ones that I own physically. There's a few more that I'd like to mention. Haunt Me is another darkwave project that's really good. My favorites on that album are going to be Vampires at Your Door and You Should Know All the Freaks Come Out at Night. And then if you want even more than the albums I already listed, I also have this playlist on YouTube and this playlist on Spotify. I'll include the links to both of those in the description below.